Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for The Abandoned, which is episode 6 of season 3 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Deep Space Nine, one episode at a time. In this video I cover the third season episode, The Abandoned. So The Abandoned is the episode in which Quark acquires a bunch of debris, a bunch of wreckage, and he finds a baby in the wreckage. They turn it over to Bashir, and this baby is growing very, very fast, becoming a teenager in a matter of days, and they trying to study it, and they don't seem to understand exactly what species it is and what it's doing, but eventually they learn it is a Jem'hadar. And he grows into a sort of around like 18, 19-year-old, and he's very active and scares people, wants to fight them, but he shows deference to Odo, and they assume that this was implanted in this genetic makeup, as they deduced that the Jem'hadar are in fact genetically engineered by the founders, and they also are genetically engineered to be reliant on a drug that without it they will die in order to, or if the founders have in order to control them. But they also apparently implanted a instinctual desire to obey the founders, so this young Jem'hadar obeys Odo, but Starfleet has ordered that they be turned over to a starship and brought to a science facility to be studied. Now, Odo is very much against this because he had his own personal experience where he was studied by scientists, and he doesn't want the same for the young man. So he tries to teach him the ways of peace and the way of understanding and the way of tolerance, but the Jem'hadar has been genetically engineered for violence, and so he has his violent tendencies. Odo tries to quell those tendencies, but then Sisko gets the order from Starfleet to turn him over to the starship, and they're coming in a couple hours, but the Jem'hadar used his shrouding to sneak into that meeting and finds it out, so he threatens to kill Sisko, and he has a phaser, and he's going to break out. He wants to go with Odo to the Gamma Quadrant, and Odo eventually talks Sisko into letting them go, and the Jem'hadar wants Odo to go with him to the Dominion, but Odo says no and has an alternative, suggests to go off to any other planet anywhere else away from both the Dominion and Starfleet, but he refuses, saying he's meant to be a Jem'hadar and he wants to be with his people. So Odo takes him to the Gamma Quadrant and returns. Meanwhile, there's also a subplot about Jake dating a dabo girl and Sisko wanting to break it up because she's too old for him, and he arranges to have a dinner with her to get to know his enemy, but ends up learning more about Jake than that he didn't knew, and that changes his perspective, and so he's okay with it now. So, I often compare this episode to the 5th season Voyager episode Drone. And Drone, I think, is the superior version. I do. That's one of my favorite episodes of the whole franchise. It's very similar. Now, they say that this episode is similar to I, Borg, and I think Drone is similar to I, Borg. I don't know about this episode, but this episode is also similar to Drone, so it's like I don't know. I don't see I never saw a direct link between this episode and I, Borg. But Renee Echevarria, who wrote I, Borg, and as a staff writer worked on breaking down this episode. He's not the writer of this episode, but he worked on breaking it down. He also talked about the similarities between the two, and I guess. But he was saying it was like a different outcome, whereas in I, Borg, they're able to reform Hugh, but the tragedy is in they have to let him return to his people. Where in this case with the young Jem'hadar, they don't manage to reform him, and they can't, and they fail, and he returns to his people. So it's a different kind of tragedy. Now, I will say, the main reason why I like this, the drone episode over in season 5 of Voyager, why I like that episode better than this one, even though they're similar. If you don't know the episode I'm talking about, it's the one where there's emergence of technology. The Doctor's Hollywood Meter and 7 of 9's nanoprobe merge, and they create a 29th century Borg or something like that, who's very futuristic and has all this futuristic technology, but he's young, doesn't understand things, and 7 of 9 sort of becomes a surrogate mother. And then eventually he sacrifices himself, spoilers, but he sacrifices himself to save the Voyager ship from the Borg. So this gets into the reason why I like Drone better than this episode, is because this episode, it turns out that the evil guy the young kid that's being raised, the evil guy is actually evil, and there's nothing you can do about it. Where I think that's too predictable and that's too obvious. Whereas in Drone, they went the other way, where I thought that they would go the obvious, easy way of, he's going to become an evil Borg and try to assimilate the ship, which would have been typical. But I thought it was very brave of them to actually take it in a different direction, to make it so, no, he actually does care about the Voyager crew and is going to work to protect them, and actually forms this bond with 7 of 9, where she's like his surrogate mother, and that was a very powerful character story. Whereas here, I'm always disappointed in the ending. I think it's kind of typical that I don't really find the tragedy in it that Renee Echevarria is talking about. That, we tried to reform him, but just couldn't. And I think part of me, and I know I may be being unfair, but part of me feels like this is sending out the message or making the commentary that some people are just beyond, or just born to be evil, or just beyond being able to be reformed. Now, I agree that some people are beyond being able to be reformed, but this is it's saying like a young child, like a teenager. And at that age, I don't know, I'm less likely to go towards they're beyond being able to be reformed, because they're still young, they're still impressionable. And but this episode's getting at, it's in his nature. He was born that way. Now, granted, because of the sci-fi mumbo jumbo, he was genetically engineered to be that way, so it makes sense for the story. But it actually doesn't make sense in commentary for real life. It's the whole nature versus nurture argument. And this episode's saying nature. Drone is saying nurture, and I actually agree more with nurture than when it comes to the nature-nurture argument. Now, I do think nature does have an effect. I'm not saying it's one or the other. It's not a dichotomy. It's not either one or the other. Obviously, nature does have some impact on a person, but I think a lot more of it has to do, especially a young person growing up, has to do with their environment, where they're growing up, with the kind of relationships they have with the parental figures, how they're treated, or how they see the world. And so, but this episode's saying, no, none of that shit matters. It's just, he's genetically engineered to fight, so that's all he wants to do. Now, again, I'm not saying that it doesn't make sense for inside the Star Trek universe, because it 100% does. It makes total sense, and you learn more about the Jem'hadar in this episode, but I don't think it makes for an interesting commentary on real life. Avery Brooks directed this episode, and he had a quote saying that he felt like this was a sort of a commentary on young African Americans who end up going into gangs or choose a life of violence. And I think that's unfair to to African Americans. Even you say gang members. I think that's unfair to say that this episode applies, because then you're saying that they're lost. Where many of the violent people of any race actually are that way, or who are like in gang life, and especially young teenagers who go into violent gangs, usually has to do with being raised in poverty and being neglected by society. And that has a lot bigger impact. Now, I guess you could say the neglect of society is in the episode, the metaphor is the founders wanting to control the Jem'hadar is a metaphor for society neglecting these communities. And okay, I mean, I guess you could go that way, but for me, that's more of a stretch, where the obvious thing is, some people just can't change. You don't even bother trying to reform them. These people are lost, which I know for a fact that definitely is not how Avery Brooks looked at this episode, for sure. But he probably looked at it the other way. But I think it's tricky, because I think for me, when I watch this episode, like just as a regular viewer who just likes Star Trek and can watch an episode for entertainment, the immediate instinctual subliminal message I got from this episode, without thinking about it too much, was people can't change. You cannot reform people. Now, if I sit down and analyze it and look at go do research on the internet and see Avery Brooks' quote and really think about the episode, then I'm like, okay, I can see that maybe the message is trying to be a metaphor for society's neglect on these more impoverished neighborhoods and why people might turn to violence. But that's only with analyzing and thinking about it, and I can definitely see that point of view. Whereas I think the immediate response to anyone who's just a casual viewer who's just watching this episode is, at least it was for me, is just instinctually, you can't reform people. And I don't know, I just think, even forgetting about the commentary of it all, I think that just looking at it as a piece of fiction, a piece of storytelling, it's too easy, it's too typical to say, that bad guy's bad, and he turns out to be bad, and there was nothing you can do to stop it. Which is why I like Drone a lot better, because Drone is subverting that typical, yes, he's evil, he's going to try to destroy the ship. That's the easy way to go. That's a typical way to go. And Drone teases that and makes you think maybe that will happen, but it subverts that and instead creates a powerful character story for Seven of Nine, and a really touching story overall. So for me, that is the far superior episode. Now, all that being said, I don't think this episode's bad. I still like it. Because there are, even to this story, there are good aspects to it. Particularly, this is a really good character story for Odo. And as much as I don't he's evil and you can't do anything about it, it does create a good character dilemma for Odo. Because he finds out, because he was sort of putting his own personal experience into it, his personal experience of being raised in a lab and being neglected and treated as an outsider and being scared by others, and so he could really relate to the Jem'hadar, and he wanted something more, something better. He didn't want him to just be a tool to be manipulated by the founders, and he didn't want him to be studied the same way he was. So he tried really hard, but he was sort of projecting his own experiences and his own feelings onto this young man who didn't really apply to. And so he wasn't looking at the reality of the situation. He was looking too much, treating this young man too much like it was himself when he's not. When there's differences, and he wasn't acknowledging those differences, and so it ended up going poorly. So, I mean, that aspect of it is somewhat an interesting story. And Odo being a really good father is a really interesting story, too. The way he's trying to teach him about certain things when he goes, smile, and does a really freaky smile, and Jem'hadar, like, tries to smile, but can't. It's a funny moment. And the other stuff about... I don't know if his thinking was, let's take him to Holosuites, have him work out his frustration, and so he can get it all out of his system, and so when he's out and about in society, he'll be more calm, which clearly is not how it works, not how the biological or psychological makeup of the Jem'hadar works. It appeared that having him fight just made him want to fight even more. So yeah, it does seem like that, and it does make sense that Odo wouldn't know exactly what he's doing, and so it does seem like he wasn't making the right decisions, and that is an interesting story in on itself. I also really like the relationship between Odo and Kira in this episode, and this is what I'm talking. Even though I don't love this episode, it's still watching it, like I've been talking about this a lot in my revisit, is that going through season 3 of DS9 is such a joy. It's just so much better than the previous 2 seasons. Like, just the whole quality of writing, acting, it's just immediately gone up. It's like instinctually, and I was getting a little bit bored with season 2. It was a little bit of a slog to get through. It wasn't bad. It was just a lot of mediocrity. But here, like, even when you have episodes like this, even episodes I wouldn't call great, it's still like more of a joy. Like, you can see the quality of writing has just gone up. And I think this definitely applies to character stories. And that's what I usually gravitate towards the most in any fiction that I watch. And I can see that the quality of character stories, this is probably due to the influx of the TNG writers Ronald D. Moore and Renee Echevarria. The quality of the character stories is just so much stronger and so much better. Like this crew feels more like a family. I talked about this in my review for Equilibrium, and so I think the Kira and Odo relationship is something they noticed. Like, they built off of the very natural chemistry between the two characters in the first 2 seasons, and season 3 definitely goes with that, like takes that and runs with it, and really shows how these two are really close friends. We saw a lot of this in the 2-part episode, The Search, and we see it again here, because before you even get the story about Odo trying to raise the Jem'hadar boy, you have the scene with Odo going into his own room, because before he used to sleep in a bucket in his security office, but now he has his own quarters. And when Kira popped by the visit, he was like, refused to let her in, and like stood in the hallway, is like, yeah, cool, what do you want, can I help you? And Kira was trying to be nice, like, look, I brought you a gift, and he's like, okay. So he relents, he lets her in, and does a whole bunch of like weird, weird structures and shit, rather than like a typical bed, like what use does Odo have for a bed, or tables or anything like that. So it was obviously he structured the quarters for himself and not to have company. And she was like, this is interesting. And Odo was explaining how he's using it to shapeshift and to learn to sort of going off of what he learned of meeting his people, that to be a thing is to know a thing, and learning how to shapeshift and appreciate that more. In fact, he said he stopped using his bucket, that he just turns into a puddle on the ground. He doesn't even need a bucket. And so when Kira brings the plant, he uses his bucket and puts it in there. And it's like a sign of affection, a sign of sentimental. And I know when Odo first explains, oh, I love it's for me to explore who I am in private. And then Kira's like, understands why he was being so standoffish at first. She's like, oh my God, I'm intruded, I'm interfering. And Odo immediately goes, no, it's okay. I'm glad you came. It really shows the type of really close relationship they have. Now, they're kind of hinting at Odo has a thing for her, and they'll explore this later, particularly in the episode of Heart of Stone. But in that episode, Odo says that Kira never ever showed any signs of ever having any interest in Odo, and he knows for a fact that she did not love him. And I don't know. I guess you could say Odo's wrong. Usually he's not wrong when he examines people in their face, and that's definitely how they were playing it. Like, he can read people, but that doesn't seem to be the case at all, because I gotta be honest, these earlier episodes of Season 3, like The Search and this episode, and I think there's a few other scenes in other episodes too, it really feels like the affection's coming from Kira more than it is Odo. And you could say that she just looks at Odo as a good friend, and I think that is true. But what I think, how it comes off to me, and again, I'm not a great studier of human behavior, in this case aliens, but they're based off of human beings. It's a fiction show. But for what I would see, it appears to me that Kira does have romantic feelings, does have love to Odo, but she's not aware of it. She consciously thinks of him as a good friend, but subconsciously is attracted to him and in love with him, but is not acknowledging those feelings. And remember, at the time, she's still technically in a relationship with Vedic Baral, though we haven't seen him in Season 3 yet. They haven't even mentioned him. But anyway, so I think that might be part of the reason why she's repressing that. Or she always just thought of Odo as a... But I think this is how I get it, because it seems like more love, more romantic affection is coming from her than it is from him. Where he gets a little nervous and stuff. But, yeah, but this scene in particular where you see the chemistry. And this is what I'm saying, the difference between Deep Space Nine and Voyager. Is when Deep Space Nine puts two characters in a relationship, it's because they see chemistry that already exists. And they're like, let's go with it. Whereas Voyager is like, I don't know, let's just shove these two characters together. Who cares if they have any chemistry? But anyway. So, yeah. And so I think, because what happens in his way, where when Kira finds out, when Odo makes moves on her, she starts to realize that she is in love with Odo, and she has what she calls a moment of clarity. And I think that makes way more sense to describe these earlier episodes of Season 3, that she was always in love with Odo, she just wasn't fully aware of it, and then the fun suddenly dawns on her as a moment of clarity that, oh my God, I actually do love him. That makes way more sense than the Heart of Stone thing of Odo saying, oh, she doesn't love me, she never showed me love with me, she's impossible for her to love me. So I always thought those two contradicted, like the thing in Heart of Stone thing of his way contradicted each other. And if that's the case, then I think the thing of his way overrides it, and I think Odo probably, if I want to justify this in the universe, I can say that Odo misread her. Which is out of character for him, because he usually knows how to read people correctly. But in this case, since it involves him, he's involved, and he's biased, and maybe his bias of, oh, she would never love me, his sort of low self-esteem influenced that read, and that's why it was inaccurate. But I guess I'll talk about that more when I get to Heart of Stone, but I'm just saying, these early episodes kind of hint to me that's the case. Now, the other thing, Admiral Nechayev, as I said, her last appearance was The Search. Although that wasn't really her, so really her last appearance was Preemptive Strike. But the last time we see her on screen, played by the same actor, is The Search Part 2. But she is name dropped here, and I didn't catch that Sisko, at the end, when Odo's like, no, I'm going to take the Jem'hadar into the Gamma Quadrant so nobody else dies, and Sisko says, oh, Admiral Nechayev won't be very happy. But, I had to tell her that we would have to kill the young boy or let him kill other people, and it has the virtue of being the truth. And I was like, yeah, fuck Admiral Nechayev. I kind of got tinges of The Offspring, where the Admiral tried to steal Data's daughter away from him. I mean, it was a bit different. It's not anyone's son. But Odo wants to look at him as a surrogate son, but that doesn't go very well for anyone. So it's a little bit different, but it made me think of that Admiral Nechayev was taking the role of Admiral Halftail, of stealing the kid away, but not really. I mean, it's only a slight little tinge that made me think of that. But the thing about, we would have to kill him, otherwise he might kill other people. What's wrong with the stun setting again? I guess maybe I tried to justify this in my mind. Maybe they're saying that Jem'hadar are immune to stun, or they don't know if Jem'hadar are immune to stun, and if they tried stunning him, maybe it would do nothing, and he would end up running a rampage, and so the only way to stop him would be to put the phaser on kill. Don't they have force fields? In previous episodes, they showed force fields on Deep Space Nine. Couldn't they trap him behind force fields and then sedate him? Pump in gas? Are they saying that gas doesn't work on Jem'hadar either? There must be plenty of ways to knock him out and not kill him. And then you can put him in stasis so he doesn't wake up. Now, is this ideal? No. But is it a way to stop him from returning to the Gamma Quadrant so Starfleet can study them and learn more about a potential enemy? Kind of on Nechayev's side here. And I don't really get Sisko's reasoning of, we have to kill him. There's no way to render him unconscious. Whatever. Whatever. But I don't know, maybe he's just going along with Odo because this is what Odo wants. Now, a couple other things about this episode. At the start, we see the Basilisk captain make her triumphant return. And she was the hairband rock star who was toying with Quark, and I think it was the Homecoming. And when I did my revisited for that episode, I talked about how I think that Quark was getting lucky with her. But watching this episode, I kind of feel like I kind of changed my mind about that and think maybe he's not. Maybe he's just getting, the little Umox tease. I don't know. It's hard to say because maybe something's happening off screen that we're not seeing, because Quark, he goes into the room with the salvage and he's like, I paid 3 bars of Latinum for this? And he's like, it was worth it. That makes it sound like he got lucky. Or maybe is he just talking about the time she just touched his earlobe and so that was worth it? 3 bars of Latinum is supposed to be a lot of money. But, yeah, I don't know. I'm still not sure about this one. I just started to doubt myself. But, I don't think we got Morn in this episode, but I forgot to talk about House of Quark when Morn was this other hot woman was hitting on him, and they ran off, presumably to get it on. Like, I guess they hinted that with Morn and everything and other things, and then Quark even says rule of acquisition. He makes up a rule of acquisition and says rule of acquisition 296. When Morn leaves, it's all over. Like, that's funny. I love Morn. I'm sure he popped up in this episode. I'm just not thinking of it. Maybe was he one of the people when the Jem'hadar like first ran out of the infirmary and they were showing the reaction shots of everyone like getting really upset and pissed off with or ready or on guard. Did they show Morn there? I can't remember. But anyway, so in this episode, we also get a side plot about Jake and Marta, the Dabo girl. This was mentioned all the way back in the second season episode, Playing God, which was, like episode 18 or something? It was kind of mid-season, and then they took all this time to get back to it. Like, they didn't touch on the storyline at all. I don't know, that part of it seems weird. But so Jake is dating a girl who's 20 years old. In fact, as Sisko says, she's actually a woman, not a girl. And Jake's still 16. And so Sisko has a huge problem with this. Now, you have a feeling, and I have the feeling, that it's not just her age. It's also her occupation. It's a combination of her occupation and her age. Dabo girl is... It's got a sexual element to the job that's sort of implied with it. That's part of it. I mean, they're not like prostitutes or even strippers, but I mean their job is just to stand by the Dabo table and go Dabo, but their job is to sort of look pretty. In fact, this episode very explicitly states that their job could include purposely being seductive to their male customers to try to mislead them. And she's apparently really good at that. So I think that aspect of it definitely has more of an element to Sisko not liking this relationship. Now, the other scene that's really interesting in this is when O'Brien's talking to Sisko about it, and Sisko's like, she's 20 years old and she's dating my son. I don't want to like her. Like, he's set on breaking it up, but when he walks away, O'Brien's like, 16 years old and dating a Dabo girl. Godspeed, Jake. Godspeed. And so, here's an interesting aspect, and we'll get into this because it's interesting. I was listening to Delta Flyers podcast, and they sort of, I think Terry Farrell and, was it Terry Farrell in this episode? I think it was. Yeah, and her and Robert Duncan McNeil were not okay with Jake dating this Dabo girl, but Garrett Wong was like, well, what's the problem? Like, I thought this episode sort of proved that it's fine. So he's a 16-year-old boy dating a 20-year-old woman. What if you flip the genders? What if it was a 20-year-old man dating a 16-year-old girl? Is that less okay? And if so, why? And also, it seems like if it was a 16-year-old girl dating a 20-year-old man, you wouldn't have people like O'Brien, or let's say swap the genders, like Kira or Dax, going like, "Go, Godspeed for doing this." Like, it would be more like, that's creepy. That would be more their. So I don't know. Maybe that just speaks to our double standard in society, or maybe there's reason for that. I'm not making a judgment on that. I'm just asking. I'm just pondering. Pondering. Would that be better? So, I mean, I myself, the way I look at it is, the state I live in and certain other states in America, I'm not sure about other countries, but they have I believe what is referred to as Romeo and Juliet laws. That there's someone under the age of 18 is allowed to have sexual relations with someone over the age of 18 as long, or I should have said that reverse, but as long as there's no more than a 3-year age difference. So someone who's 17 can date someone who's 20. Someone who's 16 can date someone who's 19. But someone who's 16 couldn't date someone who was 20 or 21 or 22. I don't know. For legal purposes, I understand how the line needs to be drawn somewhere. Because you can't have 46-year-olds dating 13-year-olds. Like, that's just disgusting. It is. And because of the underdevelopment. But a 17-year-old dating a 19-year-old, that is like no big deal. And so there are some states that do draw a sharp line at 18, and I think that's ridiculous. For example, I remember hearing about this case in Alabama, I think it was, where there was a lesbian couple in high school. One was 18 years old and one was 17 years old, and the mother of the 17-year-old was homophobic and hated lesbians, and so when she heard her daughter was having relations with an 18-year-old girl, she called the police and had her arrested, and they arrested her for statutory rape for having relations with another person who was less than a year younger than her. Now, obviously, in this case, they just did it as a bullshit excuse to be homophobic. But it does sort of bring up the question of, I think once you get over the age of 16, 17, it gets a bit more murky. Like, obviously, a 16-year-old shouldn't be able to date a 50-year-old. But a 19-year-old? Like, it would be ridiculous to charge, I think. But, so in this case, sorry, that was a bit of a tangent. But, so I'm all for Romeo and Juliet laws, is what I'm saying. But in this case, there's a 4-year difference. So it's a little bit sketchy. But I'm still okay with it, especially since Jake is a mature person who's obviously not being taken advantage of. That's very clear. But so I kind of side with Jake on this. That Sisko is being a bit prejudiced. Not so much her age, but her profession. I love how they pointed out. It's actually a really good scene, that dinner scene, where Sisko's like, when he's, what does he say? Oh yeah, when she's talking about her brother and sister and how they lost contact because they didn't like the fact she was a dabo girl, and they had a fight, and so they haven't spoken to each other. And she said, "Oh, it's amazing how people judge you on your profession." And I absolutely love the look that Jake gives Benjamin in this moment. He's like, it's so good. It's such a good acting from it. Sarah Laughlin. And apparently the Delta Flyers are talking about this in a podcast. They did some investigating. Apparently that wasn't written in the script, so they think that Sarah Laughlin came up with that himself. I thought that was, and then Sisko kind of whatever. But he does learn to appreciate her. And as he tells O'Brien, it's not because he learned more about her, it's because he learned more about Jake. That he was a dabo player, that he wrote poetry, and that he saw the way that the two of them supported each other. So yeah, I mean, obviously, if there's a huge, disgusting age difference, a 14-year-old's dating a 26-year-old, no. But if it's a little bit more blurry like this, I think it makes sense to judge it on a case-by-case basis, and in this case, it's very clear that the two of them have a strong relationship, and none of them is taking advantage of the other. But yeah, so yeah, I'm really on Jake's side, and I do like how Benjamin kind of let it go. It was like, okay, see what you're saying, and yeah, Jake does seem like a mature young lad. I was thinking though, thinking about, again, spoilers, thinking about the future of the show. If Jake ends up, if we see him dating other women, but we don't really. Marta will appear several more times in season 3, or at least once. I can't remember, but yeah, I think just once, and then they'll break up. But then I don't remember him getting together with anyone else after that, which is a shame. They should have set up for a wife, I think. Anyway, they got distracted by the Dominion War. They've really underused Jake in later seasons, I will say. I mean, I think that would have been a perfect opportunity to give him a storyline, give him a relationship, maybe even have him get married. Just throwing that out there. Or at least a long-term relationship that could lead to a marriage. But anyway, I'd now like to thank my Patreon supporters very much for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. This helped me continue with the channel. Helps me grow, become a better person. Anyway, sorry. I'd like to give a big special thanks to Jordan Johnson and Brandon Neal Howes and Antarius. Thank you all so very, very much for your strong support. Very much appreciated. Also like to give a shout out to Tyler Cease, Benjamin Mead, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Valls, Alessandro Migalicio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we do have a few Patreon comments on this episode. First comment is from Kyrie091, who says, "The abandon, more like we can shun, because they didn't want to keep the Jem'hadar kid. They wanted to shun him because they can." I remember what I said about explaining jokes, making them funnier? Way to go. Anyway, I don't know about my rhyme. Not my fault. They don't know how to come up with good rhymable names. Now, Booby Trap, that's a rhymable name. Anywho, this story is a good one. I doubt I can add anything that Mark and Norman Buchwald didn't already say better than I can. So instead, I'll just have Mark say this. Why did James Kirk join Starfleet? 'Cause he has had enough of not being in Starfleet. I'm okay with you making me say that. I thought you were going to make me say some bullshit about Endgame again. Don't do that again. Can't guarantee I will say it, but that's all good. Anyway, next comment is from Norman Buchwald, who says, "Well, this episode's debt to the child with the rapid growth kid is obvious, but thankfully much better. And yes, we will see it again in the even more superior episode. In the even more superior episode, Drone. But unlike Troy and how she is affected as the parent guardian figure, as the episode should have been about, this episode is a good Odo episode who is at conflict while his people are all about and want the child to not adopt the Dominion traits. And yes, in Drone, 7 of 9 has a similar dilemma. The difference is the Jem'hadar apparently do not have free will and are dependent on Kestrel White, which is a drug and introduced in this episode. In fact, we do learn a lot about them and the Dominion in just this one. I give it 8 vials of Kestrel White, or is it vials? I give it 8 vials of Kestrel White out of 10. Yeah, so very good point that we learn a lot about the Jem'hadar. In this episode, the Catcher Cell White, the rapid growth, genetically engineered to, worship the founders, although they didn't specifically say call Odo a god. So we didn't get that until later. We get more. I think the next episode we'll get the most exposition about the Dominion species is to the death in season 4. But yeah, this is a big sort of exposition dump for the Jem'hadar. Anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, Odo made a massive mistake in this episode. If Odo wanted to show a Jem'hadar youngling another path, why would he show the Jem'hadar fighting on the Defiant and then letting him fight in the Holosuite? Odo hated his daddy for what he did to him, and then Odo does something far worse. The Jem'hadar character would return on Star Trek Online. Worf and Odo should take notes from Benjamin Sisko how to be a parent. I know Sisko was going to end the relationship between Jake and Marta, but something magical happened. He got to know her and his son. I wish people in real life would use this approach instead of no fucking way and losing their son and daughter over prejudice. This is why Benjamin Sisko is one of the best parents in any TV show. So my rating is 8 out of 10. My second skin comment. Nana Visitor is more attractive as a Cardassian rather than a Bajoran. The dissident movement on Deep Space Nine seems just like the unification and face of the enemy. At least Deep Space Nine didn't drop it like TNG did. Was this a Rick Berman decision? Mark is nodding his head. My rating is 9 out of 10. Civil defense comment. This episode would have been This episode would have been a start and one. Sorry, I'm not sure what I was saying there. Garrick and Gul Dukat makes this episode even better. If Gul Dukat ever got with Kira, this next line is X-rated. Gul Dukat, your mother was better than you for giving PJ. My rating is an 8 out of 10. Don't get me started on a whole Kira's mother thing with Dukat. Like that's bullshit. But we'll get there eventually. It's total bullshit. But anyway, so Jem'hadar youngling in another show. I don't know. I don't agree with. I don't know what you're saying about Odo doing something far worse. I don't get that at all. I don't think he did anything bad. I mean, he tried to reform the Jem'hadar. He was being a good father. He wasn't mistreating him. I don't know. That's just my comment. As far as Kira being more attractive as the Cardassian, I'm not sure I agree there, but everyone is welcome to their own taste. Anyway, next comment is from Benjamin Mead, who says, I used to like this episode a lot, but as others have said, there are better kid from enemy alien race episodes. I think I used to like it because it does do a lot of world building about the Jem'hadar, but there are also lots of better Jem'hadar have to fight their own programming episodes yet to come. After watching those, this episode loses its attraction. In my opinion, ultimately the kid here never has any conflict. He just wants to fight, and the message seems to be that Jem'hadar are just programmed killing machines, which several other episodes after contradict or handle much better, my favorite being Rocks and Shoals. Also, I don't like how it makes Odo look naive for wanting to help the kid. I understand our characters would be afraid of a Jem'hadar, but the episode ending with Odo telling them they're right doesn't sit well to me. That's a good point. I don't know, like that last scene where Odo goes to Kira and just sits down and says, "You are right." I think that was a powerful scene. But again, I think it's not the right message. That message doesn't sit right to me. Like, yeah, you're right. I should never try to reform people. They're always going to be evil. I know it's fiction and it's about genetically engineering and it's different, but still, it's like, to me, it's sending that message. And I don't know. I guess it's supposed to be tragic, but I don't know. It just never really sat right to me. And yeah, so for me, I think the better episode that deals with the Jem'hadar that contradicts this, that they're just fighting machines, would be Hippocratic Oath. I think that's an amazing episode, and that shows that Jem'hadar can be more than just killing machines. But anyway, and I think those episodes are more interesting. The ones that say they're more than just simple killing machines. So I don't know. Yeah, that ending kind of never sat right with me. But anyway, thanks patrons so much for your comments. So my rating for The Abandoned out of 10 is going to be a 7. Very good. So yes, I don't like the ending. I don't really like the aspect of, the Jem'hadar is just a killing machine. Nothing you can do. You were silly for trying. And it does seem like the message is saying that they should have just turned him over to Starfleet right away and think they would have been better off. And I think that's the wrong message. I just do. But there were a lot of good character moments. I did appreciate, I actually liked the subplot with Jake and Marta. I think that was interesting. It was interesting getting Sisko sort of a dose of realizing that he was in the wrong. Once again, first he was trying to break up Jake and Nog, and now he's trying to break up Jake and his girlfriend. He just loves to interfere in his life, doesn't he? But no, he does. He's not stubborn, as someone in the patrons pointed out, that at least he can be convinced and is open-minded and can see that he was wrong and is willing to admit it. So that was a good character story. I love the character story between Odo and Kira. I think that there was a lot of great moments. Again, season 3 is just so much better at just writing those nice character moments and building these characters. And there were even and the intrigue of learning more about the Jem'hadar and what they're like that was interesting too. So yeah, I think it deserves at least a 7, but no more than that, because yeah, the ending was a little bit of a disappointment, and there are other Jem'hadar episodes that handle it better than this one. You know, another thing I want to talk about, which is kind of off topic, is there was these novels that came out after Deep Space Nine finished, or took place after Deep Space Nine finished, that were really good. I stopped reading them eventually because I think they got different people in charge and it started going off a cliff and getting ridiculous from what I hear. So unfortunately there were cliffhangers that for me was never resolved. I don't know if they ever were, but the whole storyline just lost the plot, so I just gave up on it. Like, the station got destroyed and they built another one, and Rolaren became the commander of Deep Space Nine, and Ezri became a captain. As soon as I hear all this shit, I'm like, I'm out. That's fucking ridiculous. But before then, like, the first novel that started, it was a series of novels, but the first one had Odo send a Jem'hadar, one who was like that one Hippocratic Oath who didn't need Catch Yourself White, so he was older and had a different disposition and a bit more wiser, and Odo sent him to essentially be Kira's apprentice, sent him to live on Deep Space Nine and learn from Kira and the other people there. And it was such an interesting character, such an interesting concept. It was like a 7 of 9, but with the Jem'hadar, and involving like Kira being his mentor, like rather than Janeway being 7 of 9's mentor. And I don't know, something about it was more interesting to me than 7 of 9. Like, I thought that was fascinating, and that was a way better. I was just thinking of it because that's a way better use of the Jem'hadar than in this episode. In fact, I think I remember thinking about this episode when I was reading that novel. I was like, wow, this is what the Abandoned should have done. This is so much better. But anyway, I don't know what happened to him eventually, because as I said, there's this whole plot line with Ileana coming back and posing as the Intendant and taking over the Mirror Universe or something. And then she brainwashed a Jem'hadar to try to kill Kira or something like that. Yeah, that's when it lost the plot. But it was good for, like, I think they had at least like 10 books that were good, and then eventually just lost the plot. But anyway, that is it for my review of The Abandoned. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, and if you want to support the channel, be very much appreciated if you leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment below. Let me know what you thought about the episode. Do you disagree with any of the statements? Do you think the ending is just fine? Is this episode better than Drone? Let me know in the comments section. And if you really want to support the channel, you could do so by supporting me on Patreon. There's a link in the description below. In that same description, you'll also find a link to Podbean, where you can watch any of my Star Trek episode reviews in podcast form on like Spotify, iHeartRadio, all those places, all those sorts of things. Ways to support the channel. Very much appreciated. So, let's see what's coming up next on my channel. On Thursday, I'll be over on Patreon doing the Patreon exclusive video for my Patreon supporters. Civil Defense. Well, I'll revisit my review for Civil Defense. Saturday, I'll be back here on my main channel for another new public review for Meridian. And then on Monday, back over on Patreon for another Patreon exclusive video. This time revisiting my review for Star Trek Generations. Getting into the whole movie thing. And then on Wednesday, I'm sticking on Patreon for another revisited, this time revisiting my review for Defiant. So that's what's coming up next on my channel, so be sure to check it out as I continue to cover Star Trek Deep Space Nine and many more Star Trek videos as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.